opinions expressed by guests on this podcast do not represent or reflect the official policy or position of the Take a Paycheck Foundation and podcast. All information shared is from personal experiences and does not constitute medical advice. We do not take responsibility for any statements expressed during the podcast. Take a Paycheck does not endorse any products or services. Any said products or services mentioned on this podcast may not be suitable for you or your condition. Please consult with your physician if you have medical questions, as it may pertain to your condition.
Hi everyone, welcome back to this week's episode on Take a Paycheck. I'm so excited to have Lori joining me today. Hi Lori, can you give me a brief introduction about yourself? Tell me a little bit about your career, your hobbies, and what you've been up to recently.
Yeah, well, my name is Lori Prue. I'm based in Ottawa, Ontario. I grew up in a smaller community of about, 25, 30,000 people just east of here. So I'm kind of grown up in the Eastern Ontario area. So yeah, it was when I was 14. And I say that because it was when I was 14 and living in that smaller community called Cornwall, Ontario, that I was started, experiencing signs of arthritis. So kind of came out of nowhere where my hips and my shoulders started to get really swollen. I used to be a competitive dancer. And so some of those symptoms actually stopped me from being able to compete in some competitions that I was involved in. And then it just kind of spread from there. So by the time I was like a couple of months into grade 9, it was just everywhere in my body. And so that sort of began my journey of kind of going back and forth often because we had no rheumatologist where I grew up. I, had to come to Ottawa, and originally I got referred to like an adult rheumatologist, but eventually I found my way to a children's hospital, or CHEO, here in Eastern Ontario, and where I stayed until I was 19. So in terms of my hobbies, I am a big lover of the arts. So, it started when I just loved, books. I love dance. I love music. I love anything related to that. So these days I took piano for a number of years and I still do play. So in terms of some of my hobbies, I can't play maybe as well with my hands the way they are. But I'm still proud to say that I can still, play some pieces, maybe not as hard as when I finished like my grade 10 piano or whatever, but that doesn't really matter. I'm not at that level, and nor do I want to carry on at that level. I've also kind of started voice lessons recently, so which is nice because you use your body, but it doesn't really implicate any of my joints as of yet. So yeah, and I have a busy life. I have 2 kids. I have a 16-year-old daughter and a 10-year-old son, so they keep me busy. And I'm married, and I've been with my husband and partner, probably going on 25 years now. So we met when I was in my early 20s. And so he's always known, my juvenile rheumatoid arthritis. It's always sort of been part of the equation and part of our relationship, not like the central part, but it's just part, of a sort of that, like it's always been there since the very beginning. So he's been with me for the ride as well over the last, 25 years that we've been together. So
Wow, that's amazing. And so you talked about lots of different topics that we're going to dive into in this podcast episode. But first and foremost, you're diagnosed with juvenile rheumatoid arthritis at that time, but JIA now, and you were diagnosed at the age of 14. So how did you actually end up seeing a healthcare professional? What were your symptoms like that kind of led you to go get some help and go to a doctor?
It was just, just very cryptic sort of joint pain and swelling were the primary things. Thinking back, I did have a lot of fatigue, but frankly, the pain was just so intense that I could hardly think of those other things. So, and really I could thank my mom because, frankly, she did a lot of the pushing with healthcare providers. We went to my family doctor many times over a very short, be like at first, and then we go back like 2 weeks later, and 2 weeks later, like we'd always try to give things a chance. But it was almost like there was disbelief that I could have this condition until my mom through many of those interactions. And frankly, she's a bit of a role model when I think of even just my own care, to kind of like not give up, right? When you are faced with healthcare providers that are kind of like, well, it's not that, it can't possibly be that. It's so uncommon, and I've heard that many times over the last 30 years. So I often think to my mom and what she did to get me a referral to like I said, we had no rheumatologist in Cornwall where I grew up. So, that was where she got a referral, and then started getting on the phone with the rheumatologist there, because I was just like, I was in such a bad way, Natasha. I don't even know how I functioned in those early months. Because even when I did get the referral, it was, say, November. And, they were like, well, we can't see you till February. And so it was just like, how am I I just remember thinking, like, how am I going to survive until February, right? And then you go to these appointments and you don't necessarily get everything all settled. So suffice to say, like, I was very poorly managed, and like my RA or my arthritis was just out of control, really, until I was about 16, and I was put on methotrexate. I tried many different treatments between the ages of 14 and 16, and that seemed to at least give me some relief at that time.
I think a lot of patients, especially, just like getting that time to see your doctor is so valuable and precious, but then sometimes you just feel like you run out of time. And I also find myself feeling that way as well. Maybe not so much in like pediatric care, but more so adult care. But for you, I guess it was still pediatrics where you had to wait a really long time. I guess referrals also take a while to even get to. And so it's really hard for patients, I think, especially because we know that we have some sort of problem, but we don't have the answers till a couple months later. And I understand the whole thing about, am I going to survive a couple more months, just because you have no clue what to do and no idea what to do. You're kind of like left alone with it. So you mentioned that you were on methotrexate. I'm assuming you've changed medications ever since and have been on multiple different medications. So what has your medication journey been like ever since you were diagnosed?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I didn't end up on methotrexate until I was 16. So prior to that, and it's funny. So remember, I was diagnosed in 1991, right? So treatments were very different then. Like, biologics weren't even like a thought, right? Like, I had no idea. So I was prescribed hydroxychloroquine, and I took that for a while. I was prescribed a lot. I basically just survived on non-steroidal anti-inflammatories to kind of manage the pain and reduce some of the swelling. I was actually taking gold. So I took gold in the latter part of grade 9 until I had like some very serious side effects from it, where I could barely eat because I had so many mouth ulcers. I have memories actually of being trying to eat pizza in like my grade 9 English class, and I could like barely swallow anything. And I just remember being in tears, or practically in tears, and trying to, just because I couldn't deal with the side effects. And then it's funny because at the time my physician wasn't super understanding about it. Like, he basically told me that it was my fault that I didn't tell them that I had mouth like cankers and these bad mouth ulcers. And I was like, that's not, like, I'm already going through enough, right? I don't need people like telling me that, like, I'm responsible for everything. It's just not the right thing to say, like, ever to anybody. So anyways, I stayed on methotrexate and went on increasingly higher doses of it until probably my second year of university. I mean, it didn't do the whole trick, I'll be honest. Like, I was on pretty much like the maximum dose of like 27.5 milligrams. Like, I don't even know today if you can kind of go above that. And I was allergic to sulfa, so I never took sulfasalazine, and I still haven't. So it was, though, in the late 90s that my dad, so talking about another role model in terms of my health, found out that there were these new medications called biologics that had come on the market, but they were only available in the United States at the time. And so, and I was also at the point where I was like, I need to do better than this. Like, school's hard, right? Like, I was trying to, I did a business degree, which, it's like a heavy enough course load, and there was just a lot. And then to manage my health on top of it was like really challenging. And I was just finding like I couldn't handle the side effects of methotrexate. Like, it was getting in the way of school. And yeah, and like my ability to sort of focus and concentrate, and just the nausea, like the day after. I try my best to kind of work around things, but I had to go to a clinic on campus to kind of get my methotrexate injections, and they were only open at certain times. So I'd often have to show up to class the next day with my methotrexate hangover, right? So it was it was not fun. So anyways, we found out about the first biologic, or there was a couple available at the time. And so I managed to get, we went to the US to a rheumatologist there in the Boston area who prescribed it to us. And we basically crossed the border every month to get the medication at a pharmacy in Messina, New York, right, which is right across the way from where I grew up. So luckily we lived on a border town, and my parents paid out of pocket for like 2 years so that I could get access to it. And it made like a tremendous difference, like so much so that my last 2 years of university, like my grades went up to like A's from like B's and maybe C pluses, if I'm being honest. And it made like a tremendous difference in my life. I don't know if I think I would have ended up on like work disability. And I don't think I would have been able to kind of work and kind of have kids and do all these things that I've done if it weren't for those medications. So
It brings such a unique perspective. Definitely like living that sort of life. I can't believe you had to travel across the border to get medicines. Like, that's so interesting. Whereas like now you can just get your medicine from a local pharmacy and pick it up. So you've seen life in two different settings of like how to access your medications, which is very interesting. And I mean, good for your parents to even be able to do that. I feel like many and hopefully all parents would be able to do something like that, but there are circumstances where sometimes parents can't even afford medications out of pocket. That's always a barrier that we've always been kind of talking about on this podcast, is like access to medications, and especially in the States. And obviously when your insurance doesn't cover you, it gets really tricky. And it's a lot for someone and a patient like living with a chronic illness. But going on to biologics, because we talked about biologics, you kind of seen biologics enter the field of rheumatology, I'd say. How did you kind of gain more information about the medicines that you were on? Were there any resources that you looked to when you were diagnosed initially to later on? How has, I guess, your education and knowledge about the medicines that you take increased or expanded? Like, how did the education work for you in terms of learning about the medicines that you take?
right. And like I said, I was diagnosed in 91. So the internet was just becoming a thing. And I'll be honest, like my dad was like an early adopter with the internet. And that's where he found out about these medications available in the US, right? The biologics being available there. So, but even like notwithstanding that, I guess I was always like, I always knew, I guess, kind of deep down that, I was the ultimate decider about my health. So even as a teenager, and that stays with me and stayed with me. I mean, I've lived with this now for 32 years at this point. So, I mean, I have a lot of experience in talking to doctors, but I don't hesitate to like ask questions. Like, it took me a while to kind of build up the confidence, but maybe too, it's like seeing my parents ask those questions and being like, remembering key details so that you can always counter what they're saying and engage in that sort of more meaningful conversation and get your questions answered. But I mean, I do look to Dr. Google, I mean, you've got to be careful. You've got to be vigilant in how you look at things, how you weigh, whether that's a good source of information, whether that's maybe not such a great source of information. And I mean, frankly, just being involved as a patient partner in research has helped me. I think it's helped improve my health literacy just because I know how evidence is created and disseminated and what is a good research paper and what's not, because I have gone to it even for some more like uncommon features that I have of JIA. Because I do have, I mean, I talked about my voice not being affected, but I do have like cricoarytenoid joint involvement, which is there are these small joints in your larynx. I think I've had it for like the whole time I've had arthritis. I did notice like voice changes even as a teenager. So anyways, I've taken to PubMed and I've done my own research on this supposedly rare thing that happens. But you know what? There's not a lot of research done about it. So I dare say it may not be as rare as we think it is. And I think, like I said, it's just, being involved in research, and not just as a participant, but I mean, as like a member of the research team has sort of helped me be more discerning at the end of the day. So.
Yeah. We're going to talk a lot more about getting involved in research and just being a patient in research, because that's how we met. Going on about your symptoms, because you did mention that you do have symptoms like in your throat as well. And so I'm wondering, like, how have your symptoms of arthritis changed over time, and like what joints are impacted?
I mean, all of my joints are impacted. I'll be like, I don't think there are joints that aren't, but it started off, just in my hips and my shoulders, which to be honest are less involved today. It's not like there isn't rheumatoid arthritis there or JIA there, but it's just compared to my hands and my feet, or like my neck, right? My cervical spine is involved. I've had 8 surgeries. I mean, not all of those are arthritis related, but a lot of them are. Like I had a cesarean section for one of my kids, so that's like the only non-arthritis related thing. But I've had surgeries on my hands. I've had 2 4-foot reconstructions where they've actually removed a bunch of the joints that are so damaged. There's like kind of nothing to be saved anymore, if you know what I mean. Like it's a pretty significant surgery. I mean, it's really reduced my pain. I'll give you, it's been positive from that perspective. And so it's not without its damage, right? And I do need to be careful about my neck with the cervical spine. I can't do anything. Like if I were to fall, or, there's no roller coasters in my future, not that, it's something I miss, but I do need to be careful and protect my joints, or what remains of all these different things. But that being said, I'm still very active. Like I go to the gym 3 days a week. And so I found a way to like keep staying active. I do Zumba, I do strength training, I walk, I probably exercise every day except the day after I take my methotrexate. It's because it's like the only day where I just can't seem to muster up enough energy. So 6 out of 7 days, so it's still possible even with the joint damage that I have. So
it sounds like as patients, we've become very mindful of like what we do on methotrexate day after methotrexate day, and we plan accordingly. Because same here, right after I take my methotrexate, like I know I can only do certain things, and some things it just needs to wait till a couple days after or later on the next day. So I totally relate with you. I think over time we've kind of realized how to plan out our days, knowing that we have to take all these medications, what the side effects are, all of that. So it's great to hear from someone else who's also experiencing the methotrexate hangover. I know we talked about it. So I wanted to talk a little bit about how you cope with your pain, and what skills and tools do you use to cope with your pain?
Well, I guess, there's like 2 aspects to it I really see, right? I'm trying to prevent pain, and sometimes that's like getting a good night's sleep, because what I've noticed over time is that if I don't sleep well, which is hard, when you're living in pain, right? To always get like a good night's sleep. I'm just less able to cope with it when it does come, because it's inevitable, like I go to the doctor, right? And they ask me to complete where's your pain on a 1 to 10. And I always put myself at a 2 or 3, and I'm like in low disease activity. Like I'm, that's not even what I could be, right? Like it's been excruciating on the other, end of the spectrum, right? Where I don't have all my meds kind of in place, or they're not acting or supporting my RA in the way I need to kind of live my life. So I do a lot just to pace myself. I don't work full time, I'll be honest. Like I probably work about 30 hours a week. I work from home, right? So that's a big part of it, is just learning how to pace myself. I've done things over time to just kind of slow life down. So instead of like rushing back to work after my mat leave with my kids, I like took all the time, right? I took the year, I took more time, because I know that I can't like layer responsibility on responsibility on responsibility, because it'll cause much more pain and fatigue, and I just won't have energy for anything, right? At the end of the day. But then when pain does happen, so I mean, those are like all my prevention things, right? Like how I kind of keep things going. I don't like, like I said, pacing is like a huge, huge, huge part of it. But then when it comes, right, I mean, I play with my medications. I've been lucky, knock on wood. Like there were times that especially as a teenager, that I couldn't get through a day without taking an opioid of some sort, right? Like it was really bad for pain. So I go to those tools when I need them, but luckily I haven't, and I haven't had to kind of return to taking some of those more significant painkillers. The exercise too, and building muscle is another way that I've managed to kind of prevent the pain or reduce the pain when it happens. I really just kind of like double down on things. If I've got to like step back from activities, I do. I find even just with flares, the best solution for me is often just kind of go into bed for like 24 hours. I don't know. I know that's not always possible. And it hasn't been possible for me in the past. I just like to say, like, I've just had to push through things like when I work full time. But I guess now over time, I've tried to build in that flexibility so I can just kind of go to bed and deal with things. And then the typical things, heat or cold. Cold, I find like cold compresses more useful, probably just because it's my joints getting inflamed, and it's worked better for me. But I know it depends on if it's your muscles, or at least for me, if it's more my muscles, I'll use heat or take a bath or those sorts of things like in the moment. But yeah, it's hard. There's like, you need a whole host of ways to manage pain, or at least I do, to kind of live my life. And so it's not the center of my life. Right?
Yeah. And you mentioned also piano at the beginning of the episode, and how you've been super passionate about it, and you kind of grew up doing lots of arts, and you're still trying to keep arts in your life in other ways, whether that be through now vocal lessons, whereas before it was piano and dance. I'm assuming you had to quit piano, like we kind of talked about that. So how did you feel realizing that, okay, like I don't think I can do this anymore? What was going on in your mind at that time?
Yeah, I mean, it was super hard. Like, just to put it in context, like I was in grade 8 in school when I was in grade 8 piano, right? So like there were only 10 grades to piano. So at that point, right as I was diagnosed, if you would have asked me at that time, I would have said that I was going into music, right? 100%. Like I was 100% committed to following that route, whether that was, I don't know what that would have looked like. maybe I wouldn't have been like a concert pianist, but I would have been teaching. I would have been doing something. I would have been performing probably in some things or accompanying choirs or, you name it. So it was really hard because it's funny. I was sort of in this like somewhat of a transition clinic, and for some reason they kind of placed me in it where like an adult rheumatologist would come in once every year, right? And so around 16, I met this adult rheumatologist and I barely got to know them. And the first thing they told me to do was to quit piano. And I was like, I think I just was like in tears, right? I was like, how can you possibly? And it's funny, like in hindsight, right? I'm like, I don't know why, first of all, anybody would ever say that to you, right? Upon just meeting you, by the way, like without getting to know you and what your sort of goals and interests are in life. But the fact is, like, piano and music was always super therapeutic to me. So for some of my really, really bad flares, right, where I ended up on opioids and that sort of thing, the only way I could fall asleep was often just listening to classical music, right? I'd listen to my favorite, whatever, Brandenburg Concerto by Bach, and next thing you know, it's like it distracted me enough that I could get like an hour of sleep, right? So those were hard times. And music is still like very much part of my everyday life. Like I'm always listening to something, and my music interests are pretty diverse. I just went to like a Hozier concert a couple of weeks ago at Ottawa City Folk, to going to a Chamberfest. Like I'm a regular patron to Chamberfest here, so I love all music, and I'm just glad I've managed to kind of get it back in. But and even then, like music, sometimes when I've been through some really bad health situations where things really go off the rails, as they inevitably do, like over the last 32 years, it's almost like I have like a song that kind of comes to represent what I've been through. So this might be like, oh, we're coming back down this road again. There's this Gordon Lightfoot song that kind of represented my umpteenth infection after surgery and the journey for that. But I don't know, there's like something therapeutic about it, right? It's like, why do people read poetry or read books, right? Like it's because it takes somewhere else and somehow represents, I think, like the human experience in a way. So so anyways, that's just something I do on an ongoing basis. I like adopt a song that has meaning to me.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that a lot. I think music is also a big part of my life as well. Like I also do vocal lessons. When we get into like research and like just into this space, although it's still a significant part of my life, I feel like a lot of people don't know that about us, that, oh, we do vocal lessons or we do piano. Like it's mainly like, okay, like you do research, you do science, things like that. But there's other ways of like coping as well. Like for me at least, it has been like also like getting involved in research has allowed me to kind of like learn more about my condition and also meet new people and help me find ways on how I can manage my pain. But on the other hand, singing, listening to music, just going to concerts, things like that, that's also kind of therapeutic for me as well. Making sure that it stays with you in some way, shape, or form. If you can't sing or if you can't play piano, listening to music, looking at someone else playing music, like there's just so many other ways that you can still have something that's really significant in your life, like remain in your life in a different capacity. And I found that for me, like I had to quit piano as well. I kind of always did singing, but I continued to do singing, but even further. Like I did more singing just to compensate for that because I feel like I really wanted it to be in my life.
I know my one regret is that because I did a business degree, and I often think, oh, maybe I should have gone into something more around the arts, right? Like where I could, because like, I mean, even in my role with CAPA or other organizations, like I'm constantly applying to grants and I'm like, oh, maybe, I could have taken those skills and helped different like cultural, like things in the cultural sector, but anyways, there's still time. Maybe I will, and I'll get into something that's, like can help the arts, because I find, especially with the arts, like we really don't appreciate the value it brings to our world. We always talk about, like, you go to Italy and you look at all these beautiful things, that these sculptures and paintings, or the music, or you name it. But yeah, we don't do a lot to support art in society, right? We don't make it easy for artists to kind of pursue their dreams and create their art. So anyways, I'm sure I'll find a way to give back, and kind of see if I can help different cultural organizations.
So how did you go about telling your husband that you have arthritis? Like, what was that conversation like?
Yeah, I know. It took a while, it's funny. It's like a lot of different things, right? Like, you don't necessarily, or I don't. I mean, it's more obvious today because I've got some more visible signs, but back then, I mean, you could see that my hands were different, but could you figure out that I had, juvenile rheumatoid arthritis? Probably not, or you'd be left guessing. So honestly, I didn't say much, probably until we were dating about 3 months. And I was like, I figured that we were kind of, at least in some more significant, longer term type of relationship. I was like between second and third year of university when I met him. And so, you're kind of at the age where I don't know, I had dated enough, and I kind of knew the real thing from just like somebody I'm going to go out on a couple of dates with, whom I probably wouldn't have shared very much, right? Things just have to sort of develop to a certain point. I mean, he's from Newfoundland, so we would kind of had a long distance thing for a period of time because he was here in Ottawa because he was in university studying engineering. And he was here only for 4-month stints, and then he'd go back home for to kind of complete his schooling. That's just the way they had set things up at Memorial University of Newfoundland, or MUN. So, but yeah, it's funny. It's like, it just being open and honest about things. I mean, it's still a bit of a struggle, right? Because I often don't want to drag or this is how I feel about it, right? Because my days go up and down and up and down, right? And I only share, I'm not going to share things all the time about like how my health is. So it's an ongoing challenge, right? To kind of say, this is kind of how I'm feeling. This is how it's going to impact my day or our week or whatever. But I don't know. He's been great. I mean, I had dating experiences before that weren't so great when it came to my arthritis. I'll be honest, like, it wasn't, people just, the guys I was dating just didn't really understand what it was, the implications on my life, how I might have been struggling. So, yeah, I'm glad I found and my husband, and he's been through this, like, so I've had, many of those surgeries with them, making decisions even around pregnancy. He's been around for been there, right, to make some of those decisions with me around medications. He's seen the impact on me and felt the impact on our family. It's not, I'm always like supportive to people who want to have kids, but it can be more challenging, and there's a few more bumps in the road for sure when you live with, a rheumatic disease, right? And then there's a lot of different implications. That could be a whole paper or a podcast in itself. But yeah, I mean, we've been together, like I said, when you count all of the dating and everything, probably like 25 years at this point. So it's been, he's really helped me in managing my arthritis at the end of the day.
And so you're not only a wife, but also a mother to two children. Can you talk a little bit about what was going through pregnancy while dealing with arthritis symptoms? And I guess, like, how did your arthritis symptoms change through the pregnancy?
Yeah. So, I mean, I had my daughter, Claire, when I was pregnant for her when I was about 29 years old. And so that was probably because I always knew, right? I had the talk from my pediatric rheumatologist. I remember about methotrexate. So at that point, at least I wasn't on methotrexate. But it gave me enough information, right, to know that I couldn't just go into pregnancy without talking to my rheumatologist, right? Like, first and foremost, I knew there would have to be more planning. I started doing a deeper dive into some of the medications, and there's some good resources out there too, like on medications, like Mother to Baby, which is like a US based website that has a lot of information about like a lot of medications, not just arthritis. And pregnancy, as well as breastfeeding or chest feeding. So, but yeah, going through that decision-making process though, around like how long am I, or is this medication good to take during pregnancy? So that's the first question, right? How much information do we have about that medication and how good it is or safe to take during pregnancy? Because the fact of the matter is like medications aren't really studied in pregnant women and breastfeeding or chest feeding people. So it's like only that information or research is only done once it's been on the market. Often, pregnant people that are excluded from clinical trials because they're just worried about the impact on the fetus, on the child. So that's why, but it still leaves you or me at that time with a lot of like uncertainty around that. So like I said, is it safe? Like, how much information do we have? When do I stop or start taking the medication? So if I decide, so I did for my first child decided to stop taking it. And of course, this information is always evolving, right? So this was 2007 when my daughter was born. So in the years before that, there was a lot of theories, quote unquote, but not a lot of good solid data around some of those biologics, at the time. There is now for certain ones. So it is, a lot of people will switch to one of those medications because it's safer. But yeah, because of where I was, I had decided to hold. I did for my daughter's pregnancy, experience an improvement in my symptoms. So, I mean, that's no guarantee. And I didn't, just to put that in perspective, for my second child. And it was quite the opposite, where my arthritis got worse. And I had to take steroids to kind of keep me going through the pregnancy. So, and I still flared quite badly at the end and ended up quite ill, and with many sort of longer term effects on me. Yeah, it's hard. And that's why I was talking about like my husband at the time, or your partner. It's like I'm making a decision for like all of us, right? That has implications for all of us. And yeah, he was great to have. Sometimes I brought him to some of those appointments because sometimes I always thought it was better that he hear it right from my rheumatologist, who was really quite supportive at the time. But I did have like what was considered high-risk pregnancies for both. Not ironically, though, necessarily because of the arthritis, but because I have hypertension, which you could always say is kind of related to the arthritis because it is a systemic disease. So that was why I was followed at high-risk pregnancy unit at the Ottawa Hospital for both my kids.
I just wanted to kind of move on to your interest in your research, because I know that your research kind of with other groups lies in the field of like reproductive health. And so we kind of previously discussed reproductive health in a personal context. However, you've taken it a step further to help develop resources solely based on this topic. So when you saw the gap towards this field, when did you actually decide to dedicate your time towards this initiative, and what was the intended outcomes of the resources that you created?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of felt it, because it just sort of smacked me in the face, to be honest, like during my first pregnancy. I always was like, I need to like write some more resources because there wasn't really for like day-to-day parenting or just even all these things you need to think about and decide on. And what are the right questions to kind of, or just not even the right questions, just what are questions to ask your rheumatologist about it. But it took me a while. I guess I was just maybe too busy in the throes of parenthood with toddler and things like that. I mean, I was involved at the policy level with a Health Canada committee. It was called the Pediatric Expert Advisory Committee. So I was involved with that for a while, where it was actually a fairly significant group of us who were most interested about just medication data and how there was a lack of it, not just for pregnant women, I might add, or for breastfeeding or chest feeding, but also for children, right? So the fact that pediatric populations, right, or children and adolescents, they're often studied separately as well, like I was saying for pregnancy. So it's an interconnected issue focused around, child and maternal health. But then after I had my son and I got so ill, I was like, and I knew at that point, like I wasn't going to probably have any children. Actually, at the time, I was also recommended not to have any more children after I had my second child. That's when I developed some resources. And I started getting involved in some research projects too that sort of focused on that. Did some work with Dr. Mary DeVera at UBC, and she's involved with Arthritis Research Canada too as a scientist. And so we've been working together on and off for quite some time, just because we do have a shared interest. So she's a pharmacist and researcher who's looked at just the use of medications during pregnancy, right? And now she's actually gotten some new funding from the Arthritis Society to expand on her initial work to look at outcomes in children, right? So when you're looking at what people take during pregnancy, they don't often follow children long term, right? You might get a few years out if you're lucky. So she's trying to follow these people longer term. And so also to that end, we're working together on a couple of Café Scientifiques that we've gotten some CIHR funding for, the Canadian Institutes of Health Research. So that'll be coming in May and June of next year. So we'll be focusing on sharing some of that research, but also sort of convening people with lived experience to start talking about this subject, a little bit more. So I could share those details once registration opens, but that's into 2024.
Perfect. Sounds good. Yeah, we will definitely share those. This is a topic that sometimes patients are afraid to talk to their doctors about. And there's always like some hesitancy, even for me, I guess. I'm kind of early on, but just thinking about it, it's like, okay, how will I approach my rheumatologist about that? Will my rheumatologist approach me about the topic? Like, what is that conversation going to be? Is my mom going to be in the room? Like, it's
totally no.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
Interesting like topic. And then also if you want to kind of learn about it yourself, like where do you go to get that information?
Yeah, I know. I mean, it's something I thought about, right? As you're thinking about your future, right? Am I going to be able to work? Am I going to, if you want kids, right? Am I going to, be able to have kids? Is that going to look like, right? Or am I going to not be able to do these things? So it's all very reasonable. And I think the thought crossed my mind even as early as 18. Not that I wanted a child at that point, but like, again, what will my future bring, right? And what are options that are going to be open to me or maybe not open to me? But I think, the options are there for a lot of people. It's just a lot of making sure you talk with your rheumatologist, fairly well in advance so you can make any tweaks to your medication, because there are some that are definitely not safe in pregnancy, like methotrexate, for example, are teratogenic is what the words the doctors will use with you. It's important to also control your arthritis, right? So I think the prevailing wisdom is that you need to go into pregnancy feeling very good and having your arthritis under control, because the better your your arthritis is, the better your pregnancy will be, and your child will be healthier as well. So,
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And you're also a part of the Canadian Arthritis Patient Alliance. Can you start off by kind of introducing what they do, what their aim is, and why did you get involved and what your role is? Lots of questions
yeah,
about
yeah.
part of what you do. So,
Yeah. So the Canadian Arthritis Patient Alliance, or CAPA for short, because it's a long organizational name. We are a group of patients that live with various kinds of rheumatic diseases or arthritis. So our board of directors is made up of people that live with vasculitis or rheumatoid arthritis, and we've been diagnosed at different parts of life. Like I was involved with CAPA, I guess starting from the mid 2000s onward, as a board member. And so just last year, I started working for them in a more of a paid role, 1 day per week as managing director. I guess, getting involved. Well, I mean, I talked to you about all my different challenges, right? And accessing medications and paying for medications. And we also did some advocacy. That was also my introduction to advocacy, was through my dad, where we'd be writing to MPs and trying to contact Health Canada, for example, to see like, where is this drug in the approval process, right? So all of this, right? It shouldn't be so hard for people. And so really our aim is to, ensure that those patient perspectives, right? Like the fact that I was waiting so long to get access to this medication in Canada, because then it also wasn't covered by insurance, right? So it has these huge implications on people and their families, right? Like my parents paid out of pocket. Like most people, when, my parents were just at a point where they could. But that shouldn't be the case, right? Your ability to pay should not be the factor that means that you have good health versus somebody else, right? So it's conveying perspectives like that and health policy. So we are involved in lots of different government consultations on things to kind of convey that perspective. It might be around drug policy, but it might be around a lot of things. We've been doing a lot of work around kind of living in a world with COVID, right? As masking mandates are dropped, we've written to each of the provinces, right, to say what are you doing for people like us who are immunocompromised, and like, what are we supposed to be doing? But also developing resources, right? We've been doing, had a long time collaboration with Take a Pain Check, of course, focused on, youth and young adults, right? Another group that's kind of often forgotten as we transition from pediatric to adult care and have a special set of needs, right? So we've been doing a lot of work there. We'll be developing resources focused on that. But basically, the fact that we're kind of living this day to day kind of makes us well placed, and we should understand and appreciate that. Like, we are living this, we are the expert, we see where the gaps are, and so we're doing our darndest, right, to try to address those gaps and support people with arthritis as they navigate the healthcare system and life, right? Just trying to live the best life you can.
So I wanted to end off this podcast episode with an advice segment. What advice would you give to youth who have a chronic illness and want to continue their passion for anything that they're really interested about?
Probably the one thing I wish I could tell myself years ago, as I stressed about becoming a parent or getting into the workforce or you name it, was that, like, you have a lot of skills, right, that you've learned because you've lived with this disease 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, right? And you've adapted to so much, and you will use those same skills to adapt to whatever the next challenge is, right? Like, that you're capable and you're able to kind of get through that and do the things that you want to do in life. So I think there's a lot of strength in our community, and there's a lot of strength in each of us as individuals, right, to kind of rise to the challenge, even though there's like a lot of extra obstacles that are placed in our path.
Thank you so much, Lori, for joining me on this week's episode on Take a Pain Check. We started off by talking about your JIA diagnosis at the age of 14 and the medication journey that you've been through. Then we discussed your relationship with your significant other, specifically how he supports you, as well as your family and pregnancy. We then talked about reproductive health while having arthritis and what it's like to go through pregnancy. Finally, we ended up talking about Kappa, the organization that you're heavily involved with, as well as resources that you've been working on with other researchers. So everyone, like, comment, subscribe, check out this episode on different platforms, and I'll see everyone in 2 weeks on Take a Pain Check. Thank you so much, Lori. Bye.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I can't hide, 'cause growing pains are keeping me there.